First of all, a massive thank you to everyone that has been listening to the podcast and sending me lovely messages about it. However, I know from the analytics that we also have a ton of secret listeners. So if you're a secret listener, my request to you is as follows. If you enjoy this episode, share it on LinkedIn or on Instagram and tag me. I would absolutely love to hear from you, and all feedback is always welcomed. On today's episode of Stamp Your Mark, I'll be speaking to Molly Johnson-Jones. Molly used to work in investment banking, and because of her autoimmune disease, asked for 1 day a week to work from home. And instead of hearing her out talking about the merits of remote working, her employer decided to fire her. Molly has since co-founded Flexa, a careers platform dedicated to showing and verifying truly flexible companies so that nobody has to experience what she did. So, introducing Molly Johnson-Jones.
I'm definitely not anti-office. I think there are massive benefits for it. What I am anti is forcing somebody to go in all the time, and not every day is going to be a day where people are available to chat and teach people. And I think that over time, what we're going to see is that in-person work and remote work become complementary features, and the work that people do in an office is different to the work that people do at home.
Right.
If you've got external Zoom calls with clients and you've just got to reply to loads of emails, why would you go into the office and do that?
Molly Johnson-Jones, how are you?
Very good, thank you. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. Thanks so much for making the time to join me on the show.
Not at all. Thank you for having me.
So I'd love to start with a question about Flexa. What is Flexa and what is the story?
So Flexa has kind of grown to be a talent attraction and employer brand platform from the company side, and from the candidate side, basically allows you to find out exactly what it's like to work at a company before you've even considered applying there. So when you go on Airbnb, and you want a countryside cottage with a hot tub and it's dog friendly, and you put those filters on, you do that with companies or with jobs. And you could say, I want flexible hours, remote first, but an office I could go into if I wanted to, and dog friendly, and all of those companies or all of those roles will come up for you.
And how does that work specifically?
So we verify companies as being truly flexible. So we've created 2 different indices with hundreds of thousands of data points that we've collected. That basically allows us to quantify and sort of codify exactly what flexibility is. So companies take 2 different quizzes. One is with an HR leader, and they just answer really objectively. We assume, hopefully at that point, they're telling the truth, but they're not always. And then the second one, we go into companies and we survey their employees with a 60-second survey, take a statistically significant sample of that, which then allows us to give actual verified and hopefully very much true information to the people that are looking for jobs. Because normally there's this total informational gap between candidates and companies. You apply to a company definitely not knowing what it's like to work there. You might not even know what the company does, whereas you would obviously want all of that information up front in an ideal world.
I love that there's the employee part to it as well. So there's literally no hiding.
There's no hiding. And some companies do fail between the first and second hurdle, which is quite an awkward conversation to have.
What does that look like? So essentially the HR leaders and the people running the business think it's brilliant and flexible. But then the reality is the opposite.
The total opposite. And often the reasons that a company will pass the first stage and then fail the second is because they'll say they have flexible hours on paper, but they're doing an 8:30 a.m. stand up every morning and then a 6 p.m. stand up at the end of the day. So how flexible can you actually be? Or senior leadership are in the office every day and then they're saying, oh, we have flexible location. But if your boss and your boss's boss is in the office every single day, you're going to want to be in the office too. So there's lots of different reasons people fail between the first and second, but about 37% of companies at the moment are failing the whole thing.
Oh, wow. That's a lot.
Yeah.
And just so I understand the business model better, how does it work financially?
So it's totally free for people to browse the companies, the roles, to save them. They don't even have to sign up to view it all. I think that's quite a broken system with job platforms where it's all behind this registration wall. It's also bad for companies if you hide it behind that. So it's totally free on the D2C side, and then the B2B side, companies pay an annual membership fee to be certified, to have gone through that process, to have the company page, and for us to drive all that traffic to their company pages and to their jobs, because we've got over 420,000 users now.
Wow. And so what's the story behind Flexa? I saw that it started, I think it was Feb 2020. So it wasn't as if it was inspired by what was happening around the world
Yeah.
at the time with COVID, but you
Yeah.
hit it just before this huge trend towards flexible working.
Yeah, it
So it
was
sounds like the
funny
timing was
time
perfect.
to launch.
Yeah.
We launched 3 weeks before lockdown,
Wow.
which was quite a shock when it actually did happen. And we were like, oh my God, what have we done? But the story for Flexa actually probably started in 2016, but I don't think we realised it. So I started my career in investment banking. I was in equity research, and I was doing that for about 18 months, which very much, in hindsight, really didn't suit me because I'm, as I mentioned when I first came in, I'm not a morning person.
Right.
And I was up at like 5 a.m. every day, going into the office for 6:30, and I have an autoimmune disease. That means that I'm technically classified as disabled, and I got to the point where like once a week I couldn't walk, like my feet would swell up so much that I couldn't get into the office. So I asked to work from home once a week when that happened, rather than taking sick days. It was getting a lot. And they put a settlement package in front of me, sacked me, and told me to leave immediately. Like literally, like you can't even go and get your stuff, we'll send it to you.
What was that like? If you bring us to that actual moment, were you sitting with your boss in a conference room talking about that?
My boss and an HR person who was obviously there to mediate, they put the settlement package over, I read it, and it felt like, that sinking feeling of just like sudden total panic where you go cold. And I was only 23, I thought it was my fault. So maybe I shouldn't have said anything, maybe I wasn't working hard enough. And then I remember they went and got my phone for me because I didn't bring it in. And they were like, you have to leave. And I went downstairs, we worked on Oxford Circus, I went downstairs to like a bench outside Pret and just sat there and cried. And I was just like, I don't know what's just happened. Because I was told I was on for a promotion, like it came completely out of the blue.
And you'd been there for 18 months, right?
Yeah.
You'd made friends there.
Yeah.
You'd done good work there that you were proud of.
And they were told they weren't allowed to talk to me. My friends were not allowed to talk to me.
Oh, that's harsh.
Yeah, so they did after a while, but they had to wait until I was fully out of like all the legal, because I obviously had lawyers and stuff, had to wait until I was out of the legal process before they could even text me.
Wow.
Yeah, that's mad.
And so what happened in your career after that?
Then I was like, maybe I won't tell people I need flexible working. And then you just end up back in the same scenario. Yeah. And I just wished all the time that there was somewhere that wasn't Glassdoor, because Glassdoor's shit and everyone hates it. I've never met anybody who values Glassdoor. Somewhere reliable to go to find out where offer flexibility. I went and I, managed to find places where it was okay. I led a food retail research team at Global Data. That was quite flexible, but it wasn't right for me. Then I became a strategy consultant, which also isn't very flexible. Should have thought of that, traveling around the world. And then became a UX researcher at a really, really flexible company, 11FS, who are actually Flexified. And that's also when I met Maurice, who's my co-founder and my fiance. We met. We were a couple before we started the business, not the other way around. Mm-hmm. And he was working at Betfair, which was also super flexible. We asked those companies, like, why don't you publicize it? And they were like, well, there's nowhere to go to do that. Like, you can put it on a job description or a careers page. And so then we were like, maybe, or Maurice was like, maybe we should build this. And then I bought him a whiteboard, and that's where it all started.
Nice. Were you apprehensive at all about working with your partner in this way, starting a business with your partner?
We kind of didn't even really think about it, like maybe naively. We think about things in a very similar way, but we have really different skill sets. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm very impulsive and like I have an idea and I want to run with it. He's like trained accountant, tells me off when I buy more trainers, kind of like very logical person. So we actually complemented each other very well, and we didn't think about it. It just snowballed. I think there's a lot of stigma attached to working or co-founding a company with your partner, and I often think it's very interesting as to why that is. I think often people think, oh, well, I wouldn't want to start a relationship with my girlfriend, boyfriend, husband, wife, because that wouldn't work for us. And so they project their relationship onto you. And I think often people assume, I think wrongly, that like working with someone that you don't know is better because there's less risk and relationship and emotion. But actually, if you're investing in a couple, they've got a history of dealing with conflict and compromise and getting over it. So if anything, it's way easier to work with your partner, as long as you get on in that respect, than it is to try to navigate the very complex world of starting a business, when there's the potential for so much disagreement of who's in charge of what and the decisions you make, it's been way easier being comfortable with the person you're doing that with.
Mm-hmm. And so what happened then? So you decided to start this business. What happened in the months following that?
We decided to launch it, bought a whiteboard, went to the pub and drew up some vague form of business plan. Like, we weren't people that were like, we want to start a startup. Like, there's two types of founders. There's ones that really want to start a startup and they're waiting for the idea. And there's people, I think, that have the idea and then they're like, well, maybe I'll run with this. We were definitely in the latter bucket. We then needed a third co-founder, technical co-founder who could actually build the thing. So we found Tim on AngelList, who's been brilliant. He's still our third co-founder. And started building it. We were all still working. We hadn't given up our jobs. We were just trying to see if this was going to take off, particularly on the D2C side. And then it did. It started to snowball. In like 6 weeks from launch, we had about 4,000 users that were kind of signed up and waiting to go. And it just got to the point where we were like, no, this does have traction. We were all still working part-time when we started raising our pre-seed round. And then it kind of snowballed from when we raised some money and were able to do it properly.
How did you go about attracting that first 4,000 people?
We realised that there probably wasn't any point in like building this all singing or dancing platform for it to fall flat. So we bid on a couple of terms about flexible working, posted about it on LinkedIn and put up a landing page and a waiting list and said, this is what it's going to be. Are you interested? Nice. And that was how we got the first 1,000. Then obviously when you launch with activity and with people sharing about it, it's much better and easier to get momentum.
And so talk to me about the actual timing of it then. So you started this just before COVID.
Yeah.
And then as COVID was starting to kind of set in across the world, people were having to work more flexibly.
Yeah.
And then since then, if I look at LinkedIn, if I speak to different founders that we work with or that, I know, flexibility seems to be a massive trend that people genuinely care about.
Yeah.
And so, I would love to hear more about the wider circumstances around launching this.
Yeah, we were a bit worried in the beginning when it was like everyone's working from home. It was like, well, the USP is kind of gone. And we were waiting to see like how that would affect people's opinions of it, because it could go one of two ways. It was either going to be like, wow, this is great, I love having freedom and choice, or it could go, this is too much and I desperately want to go back to an office. We thought it would land somewhere in the middle, and it has. But it was waiting for that to happen. Like, we were gaining momentum, but companies are a bit like, well, we're all working from home at the moment, so we don't know. Whereas in the last 6 months, it's been like, we want to prove that we're continuing to be flexible, because 78% of people in the like office global population say that flexibility is a non-negotiable. Like, they won't work somewhere without it. That is a huge proportion of the population, and companies need to be able to appeal to that. So then it became a much easier sell, because it's like, you're flexible, you want to shout about it, use it to your advantage. And for people, the Great Resignation, like, people will have read about it everywhere. People want to leave jobs that they're not happy in, and that's built up over the last 2 years because they were feeling very insecure about the economic circumstances, and they weren't leaving because it was in the middle of a pandemic. Now people are looking to leave to go to places that are better than where they currently are.
A lot of the time I see companies talking about flexibility, and if you drill down into it, what they mean is that you can work from home once a week. Yeah. Is that true flexibility in your opinion?
They would fail.
They would fail. They would fail all the tests.
Yeah.
So how do you define flexibility?
So flexibility is very much a spectrum, and it's why we have the index, and the company has to score 60% in order to be considered flexible. Like, to put that into a working environment, that would be at least 2 days a week from home, some flexibility on hours. So like, come in half an hour earlier, later, not like you need to be at your desk by 9 a.m. And some benefits like maybe additional annual leave or enhanced parental leave or a dog-friendly office, some benefits that add flexibility. That would be 60, so like nothing mental. But then there's the other end of the spectrum where some companies are, where it's just total freedom. They have an office, but you don't have to go into it at any point. You can work from anywhere in the world at any time, and it's all asynchronous, and they've got every benefit under the sun. We'll pay for your Airbnb if you want to work from anywhere. We'll pay for, travel to do so, or unlimited annual leave, unlimited sick leave. There are some amazing benefits out there, and that is the 100% kind of end of the spectrum.
Got it. It's a great definition. And so a lot of people, when it comes to kind of flexibility, if I'm thinking about the way our company is set up and the way a lot of other companies operate, it would be a real challenge to suddenly become a flexible business. There needs to be a certain infrastructure in place, certain processes, types of communications. So, you know, in your view, what are the key things that have to be done for a company to then be able to bring the flexibility to life?
The first thing they have to do is actually listen to their employees and what they want. And you'd be amazed at like how often that doesn't happen.
Right.
Company would be like, what should we do? And I say, have you asked your employees? No. So that's the first thing. And trying not to appeal to 100% of people, because that's literally impossible. But taking 70 to 80%, the majority, and saying this is what they want. Often that is like going into the office once a week or once a month as they wish to. But the kind of actual frameworks around it aren't necessarily the most important thing. The most important thing is culture. And I think culture is often like a very fluffy term, and like people don't know how to define that. But the most important thing is senior leadership role modeling, that flexibility. As I talked about before, like if all senior leadership are in the office every day, people will feel that expectation. Or if they don't take their holiday, they'll feel uncomfortable taking their holiday too. If they're not away from their desks to pick their kids up from school, people won't feel comfortable to do that. The most important thing that a company can do is make sure that senior leadership are role modeling it, because people will emulate those behaviours because it makes them feel comfortable and it's culturally accepted.
And when it comes to young people in the office, I think one of the really good arguments for the office is that young people can learn physically from the people around them. And if they have a problem, they can literally tap somebody on the shoulder. Do you agree with that?
I'm definitely not anti-office. I think there are massive benefits for it. What I am anti is forcing somebody to go in all the time, and like not every day is going to be a day where people are available to chat and teach people. And I think that over time what we're going to see is that in-person work and remote work become complementary features, and the work that people do in an office is different to the work that people do at home.
Right.
If you've got external Zoom calls with clients and you've just got to reply to loads of emails, why would you go into the office and do that? But if you've got collaborative team days, you've got a new joiner starting, you've got big strategy sessions or big in-person meetings, that should definitely be done in the office, and that's a good thing. And I think that it's just going to become a bit more of like people need to plan their weeks better and schedule that better. Companies need to be aware that those two types of work are complementary, but they shouldn't really have a massive amount of overlap.
Yeah, I definitely hear that. There are times, so there are 16 of us now in the business, and we've got an office which can house everyone, and it's great. And I love it when people are in, but at the same time, I get what it's like to go all the way into the office just to sit on back-to-back Zooms and just think, why am I here? It doesn't make sense. Or perhaps I'm in the office and people are having a good time, people are talking, so the volume is quite loud. And so then I need to go elsewhere to actually get my head down and concentrate.
Exactly. And then you get distracted and it doesn't work as well. So it's about kind of piecing those things together. But I do think it's important that you have an office that everyone can fit in. Because otherwise people feel like they're discouraged from going in as well. Whereas you have a desk, you have a place to go. People are much more likely to come in for that in-person interaction. Yeah, exactly.
I saw on your LinkedIn a post about dogs. You said that at Flexa Careers, we've seen the number of people searching for organisations with dog-friendly offices on the platform increased by 350% in March 2020 compared to March 2021. Sorry, March 2022 compared to March 2021.
Yes. That's mad, isn't it?
It's crazy. People love dogs and love bringing dogs. What is this? Is this people bought, puppies in lockdown and now they need to bring them in? Or is this people just really embracing flexibility and not having to get a dog sitter?
I think it's a bit of both. I think there were 3 million dogs bought during lockdown. Like that's a lot of dogs in the UK. And obviously people would ideally like to bring them into the office because it's cheaper and you get to spend time with your dog. It's nicer for the dog as well, as long as they're okay with the office. And so we've just seen this demand massively increase, but it's also been mirrored by the number of organisations that are offering dog-friendly offices has, I think, nearly doubled. And it's those two sides of it that are obviously normalising it, which means that people aren't afraid to ask if they can bring their dog in anymore, whereas before it would have been seen as sort of like a bit of an outrageous question.
And I saw that you bring your dog into the office. And you've got a chief morale officer, which is your dog.
That's my dog,
And then there's also a chief SAS officer. Can you tell me about them? What are their roles in a business?
Gruff's role, my dog, is just to kind of sulk around and get people to desperately want him to love them, but he doesn't love anyone. So Heidi, who's Shannon, who's our marketing manager's sausage dog, she is just very sassy. I was eating a chicken wing at the pub, and she once jumped into my hand, grabbed it whole and swallowed it whole, and she's like tiny. There's a whole chicken wing.
Oh my God.
We've actually also got more company dogs as well. We've got our account manager has a Schnauzer cross something. We've also got a German Shepherd cross Labrador and a Staffy cross Labrador. So we've got so many people with dogs, but they don't all come in at once.
Yeah. So at what point does it get a little bit too much?
I'm sure if all of them came in at once, it would be a bit mad, but they don't, because we've got employees all over the UK. So we only meet up once a month, and we pay for travel down, accommodation, and often they'll leave their dogs at home for those kind of meetups.
So when we used to work in the co-working space, of where we're at now, we have a private offices. Used to be in the co-working space, there are a lot of dogs. Sometimes the dogs were really cute and well behaved. Other times they did not stop barking, and it was a bit of a nightmare. It's the idea of like, you know, super office friendly, tons of dogs coming in. It's like doggy daycare more than work.
But then you also, you know, the emphasis is on the human to train their dog so that it's okay for it to come into the office. I don't think you can just go, oh, I have a dog and a dog friendly office, so automatically I'm going to bring my dog in. Like, there's a lot of training and preparation you have to do for that to be possible.
So I saw that you offer 45 days of holiday, which I think is wild. Before I ask you about that, I want to reflect on a piece of advice given to me by someone who was brilliant. But it was when I first looked to hire somebody for the first time at WOW, and they said, you know, put unlimited holidays as a perk. And I thought, I'm not sure. I ended up doing it and realised once I'd introduced that would have been an absolute nightmare. Obviously, I was a small business, but if that person would have, you know, actioned their right to take unlimited leave, that would have been really painful. And so what does this look like for you, having 45 holiday days as a startup? Surely if people take that amount of time, there's a real, you know, negative implication for the business and for the productivity.
Not really. So the reason that we went with the 45 days, that does include bank holidays as well, was because unlimited holiday, there's loads of research that's been done on it. People actually take way less holiday than they should. So often they won't even take like the statutory minimum of the 18 days that exist in the UK. They'll take like 12 because they won't know what the rules are, what's okay and what isn't okay. And then you'll get the occasional person who takes the piss and takes like 60 days. So it's kind of lose-lose, like regardless of what happens. And I think although obviously the theme of like the future of work at the moment and very much what we stand for is giving freedom and choice. But I think that freedom is only ever actually taken advantage of when it is within some parameters and like some framework. So we have 25 days of like normal holiday. Obviously then there's like 9 bank holidays a year or something, 1 birthday day, and then the big additional holiday is that we close the company fully, so like nobody works for the last week of August, which means that like there's no notifications, people can properly switch off. To be honest, that's kind of my own sanity than anyone else's. And then we also do the same thing from like the 22nd of December until the 2nd of January, so that's a big period off as well, like it's fully shut. It means that people don't have to worry, and I think everyone comes back quite excited and like ready to go. And then otherwise we just say to people like more than 2 people can't be off at the same week. It can be a day of overlap, that's fine, but like not in the same week.
Have there been any challenges with closing the business in August and December?
They're naturally such quiet periods anyway, like who actually does any work between Christmas and New Year? Like I don't think anyone does. And the last week of August in our industry, it's school holidays. A lot of the people that we'd otherwise be talking to at clients, like they've gone away. It's so quiet that we're sitting there twiddling our thumbs anyway, and have done for 2 years in a row.
Right.
So it just made complete sense to enforce that.
And is there no worry that something will break and there will be no one there to sort it out?
I'm always aware.
You're always aware.
Always aware of like stuff going on. Like all 3 co-founders are always aware of something going on. But you know, touch wood, nothing is broken yet.
On that note, when you do take holiday, are you able to switch off properly?
Only during the weeks where everything's like dead. We went to Cape Town in March and we're on Slack for like most of the time.
Oh no, that's painful.
Because it's just like conversations and back and forth. And I'm sure if we did completely leave, everything would be fine. It's just sometimes it's quicker and makes more sense for us to just be on hand. And you're still traveling, having a nice time, you know, go for a swim in the sea and going to the pub and stuff. But like, it's not total switching off time, which is why those 2 weeks of the rest of the year are really important.
Mm-hmm. What are some of your main learnings since you started Flexa?
Everything. I don't think I've ever learned more in the space of time. I think probably one of the biggest learnings is that you don't realise how much other people's opinions really affect you. And everyone, when you're starting a business, I'm sure you've had the same thing. Like, everyone has an opinion about what you should or shouldn't be doing, and how it's so risky, and how they want to tell you what to do. Mm-hmm. And I definitely got to the point, I would say this, like, my piece of advice to other people is like, ignore everyone's advice until everyone's telling you the same thing, because otherwise it's so easy to get distracted. And as you said about earlier on, and we'll probably talk about it in a minute, about unlimited holiday, like, somebody will tell you to do something and then you realize it's not the right thing to do. And like, I don't know, there are other things that we were told about fundraising and like the right way to do it, and what we should actually be doing with our business in terms of monetization. But these are people that had no idea. They just wanted their opinion to be heard, and people love their opinions to be heard. Like, it's like such a natural human thing to want to happen.
It's really difficult figuring out what is good advice and what is bad advice. Something that I've noticed is that everyone has such a huge bias to how they did it and how they became successful.
Yeah.
And people want their opinions heard, as you said. So somebody could give a really solid piece of advice, but just the context of their business and what the business world or what that specific industry was like at the time is now completely different to what it is. So it really has very little relevance.
Yeah, but people don't realise the subjectivity of their own opinions. Mm-hmm. And that's always the problem.
What do you do when people give you unsolicited advice?
It depends if I'm in person or not. If someone gives unsolicited advice and it's not in person, I kind of just tend to ignore it and reply politely. Right. If it's in person, you just smile and nod. Like,
so no promises, no great ideas. Just
no. Like, I don't really. I used to be very polite about it and listen and be like, yeah, great idea, or definitely bear it in mind. But then you're setting people's expectations up as well, where they're like, oh, did you ever go anywhere with that? Did anything ever happen? And you're like, no, because I completely ignored you.
Yeah. It's difficult because you want to be, as a human, you want to be liked. And as you said, I definitely felt that as well. It's only now I'm coming to the terms with, well, I have done for a while, but what my actual role within the business is. And I'm not there to be liked by everyone. It doesn't make sense for me. It doesn't make sense for the careers of people working at the business as well.
Yeah, but that's a really hard thing to come to terms with, I think. Like, I definitely spent a long time thinking, oh no, you need to be liked. Like, you need positive reception from people. But as you say, it's not necessarily the best thing for you or the business or the people around you. But I think that coming to terms with that and like other people's reactions to that can be quite tough to deal with. And like, I've definitely noticed that people expect women to be nicer. They expect you to be warm and friendly and smiley and gentle. And as a founder, like, you can't always be like that. And I've definitely never been like that. But I think I've become more unafraid of, as you said, like, being disliked. But it's very interesting. Often I talk to people, and if you do push back gently, like still politely, about things, like the words that are always used, and I doubt that they would ever be used for a man, are cold and aggressive. And they're two words that just like stick with me all the time. It's like, would you ever call a man cold? No, that's like a weird word to use. And would you ever see a man as aggressive, unless he was being like really aggressive, like, trying to pin you up against the wall or something? It would be assertive. And it's very interesting seeing how people react to that.
Do any particular anecdotes or stories come up when you think about that?
Just like negotiations, a particularly big one, like an investment. I think some people are quite, particularly men, uncomfortable with negotiating with a woman who will push back. And I've definitely had some very frustrating situations.
Like what? Any of the juice that you can share?
Not really. No, actually, no. They're for the ones that didn't invest in us, and actually generally our investors are brilliant. Really can't criticize them. But we had, in like early stage fundraising, conversations, and like, I now lead fundraising, so it's just me on the calls. But it used to be that Maurice and I would be on the call together. I think there's lots of reasons that doesn't work. Like, people like to feel like rapport with one person, not two, on a call. I think also what we started to find was that if it was both of us on the call, people would start to defer to Maurice even when I was answering questions.
Right.
So they'd ask a question, I'd answer it, and then they would respond to Maurice, which was really frustrating. And there were definitely calls that got quite heated because we would call them out on it and be like, "You're talking to Molly. Why are you asking Maurice this question?" And they'll also ask women very like risk-based and like defensive questions about like, but what about this? Like, what if this problem occurs? Whereas, and you see it in these calls, like they'll ask men like opportunity-based questions, like how big can this be? Like talk about where your growth is going to come from. And one of those kind of shuts the conversation down if it's all risk and problem-based, and one opens the conversation up. And so it's very difficult to navigate around that. And I think always the trouble is that people want, when you try and explain this and like the difference in treatment, I think naturally people want to hear anecdotes that they can relate to, because everyone loves a story. Like it's easy to relate to stories. Like marketing is based on stories. People's understanding is based on stories. But very often, I think experience as a female founder, it's like constant microaggressions that like you can't turn into this really interesting story or anecdote. It's just like, I'm spoken to differently, different words are used towards me. And it's really, really hard to bring that out. But obviously then if you put that in with data and like the shocking data that exists around funding female founders, minority founders, it's horrendous.
This reminds me of the conversation I had with Sophie Barron on the podcast. So she founded Mama Made with her husband Ian Barron, and she would recount times when investors would just move her from CCC, drop her from CC in an email when she was leading the email. If that was me, I would be so fuming. I'd be so fuming.
That's happened. Times where like I'm just not addressed in emails, that kind of thing. We've had also on the couple thing, we've had investors like refuse to even look at the pitch deck because we're a couple, which is just amazing. Like there's just people just have so much internal bias about the world and about people around them. And that is incredibly frustrating when you're trying to raise money and trying to be like, I want to be treated as an equal. We are a couple. You're trying to be honest and just raise money for a business that you think is going to go really far. But people look into like your gender, your marital status, you know, how you come across, your race in so many cases, like even your sexual orientation, I'm sure, like it's horrendous. It really, really needs fixing.
Are you positive about this changing in the future? So you're on your third raise now. So you've been through the process a few times. Have you noticed any small improvements along the way, or is it way too small a time span?
I think it's too small a time span. Like the change that I've noticed has been because we made a big change. So in pre-seed, we were just targeting various different SEIS, very early stage funds. Same with our bridging round that we did. So we kind of done like 2.5 rounds. And then this one, we just totally changed our tactic because I just got fed up with being seen as a negative to the business. Like you want to be seen as like neutral at best. Don't feel like that's asking for very much. So we changed our tactic and we didn't do any outreach fundraising, and we didn't speak to any VCs that didn't have a female partner or weren't female focused. All of a sudden, we raised the round very quickly.
Brilliant.
Reception is completely different. And now we have more women on our cap table for this round than men, which is like unheard of. And that's not, just like small tickets, female angels. This is like big VCs that are female led. And I think that is the way that change will happen, is by more women being on both sides of the table.
That's great. Going back to this question of learnings, what else comes to mind? You're running this brilliant business, been doing so for over 2 years now. Have there been any kind of horror stories which have then led to brilliant learnings? Has there been a really steep learning curve? Would love to understand all of that.
Really super steep learning curve. And I think the biggest learning of the learning curve was you always think, oh no, I don't know how to do that. There's always these barriers that you think like you can't overcome. But when it's your business and you have ultimately the absolutely terrifying fear of failure and like not making this work, it will make you get over anything. So like setting up our first Facebook ads and paid ads, you learn how to do Google search, you learn how to hack SEO in the early days before we had any employees. And I think that the biggest learning is that like you can't underestimate your own ability. But equally, when you can then hire people to do it better than you, don't overestimate your own ability, because there's always people out there who can do those smaller things better. It's just that in the early days, you don't need to pay like, I see founders ask like, oh, does anybody know anyone good to set up my Google Analytics properly? It's like, you can do that yourself. Like, you don't need to pay somebody to do something like that. So I think that's another really, really big learning.
And it also helps having that kind of initial understanding of something before you then delegate it elsewhere.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you've got no clue of what good looks like.
And then people can totally take advantage of you
Yeah.
in that instance as well. If you don't really know how things work. And then when you try and interview somebody, how do you know what you want if you're interviewing someone to hire them, if you like have literally no idea about what your tech stack is? Like, I still really wouldn't want to interview a tech person. Thank God we have a technical co-founder. But like, if you know nothing, you're very easy to take advantage of.
Is starting a business something that you would recommend to other people? And you mentioned these two different camps of people. Let's say we're talking about those who are in a stable job and their lifelong ambition is not to start a business.
Yeah.
So it's something they could fall into. Would you recommend that those people do?
If you have an idea that you like really, really, really do believe in, then yes, like I love it. But I think one of the reasons that I love it so much is when I was in my career, like I never found anything that was right. I got bored very, very quickly. I wanted to be a generalist. That's kind of what I am. And I think for generalists, starting a business is quite exciting because you get to do so much stuff.
Yeah.
But equally being a specialist, if you're a brilliant engineer, then why wouldn't you go and be a technical co-founder? Like, there's so much opportunity. I think that people do underestimate quite how much you sacrifice though. And I think it's not something to go into lightly. And there wouldn't be like, if you have an idea, don't go and quit your job tomorrow, like ease into it, try to go part-time, see if that idea has any traction. Because it's not easy to get it off the ground. And I think that people really underestimate the sacrifice. Like, no one tells you that you can't get a mortgage as a founder. Like, no one.
It's impossible.
No one told you.
Yeah.
We got like 6 months in and we were like, oh shit, like we can't get a mortgage. And obviously we're both in it together. So that wasn't a great realization. We probably should have done the research there. But no one tells you that kind of stuff.
Tells you.
And no one tells you this. You're on no salary. You're not paying yourself for ages until you can raise funding. But then loads of people go and try and raise the funding because they want to be able to pay themselves. But that's not always the right reason to raise funding. Like there's so much you have to think about. But if somebody told me, if you could like travel in a time machine back to 2019 when we had the idea, and they could like do a flash forward of the next 2 and a bit years, and I saw everything that was going to happen, I probably wouldn't have done it.
No. Really?
Yeah.
Wow. It's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because there's just so much shit that you have to deal with the whole time.
And just uncertainty and stress and anxiety, and there's just so much that you have to think about. And that would be very overwhelming in the first instance. Like I absolutely don't regret it now. I love what we do. And I think we've got so much potential. But if you knew all of that up front, I don't think very many people would start a business. But
also when you're looking at it, you're looking through the lens of who you are at that point in your life and what your resilience is like.
Way
and
lower.
How much you can really take.
Yeah.
Whereas along the way, you've spoken about these steep learning curves, you would have built so much of that resilience, and you'll be able to manage so much more.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think resilience is a really important skill for founders. Really.
Is there anything else that you've experienced where you were like, wow, I wish I knew about that beforehand. I wish somebody told me.
Definitely on the fundraising side of things, yes. So I think, and Tom Ferry, I was on his podcast a while ago, and he's actually one of our investors. He's been pretty pivotal to us being able to raise money well. And he once said to me, and he posts about it a lot on LinkedIn now, but he sort of became my unofficial mentor with fundraising. And he was like, no one cares about your product or the problem you're solving. You have to paint this enormous like picture of how big it can be and what the market is. And I think I really underestimated that. And if somebody had told me that 2 years ago, I think I definitely would have raised money very differently.
Would have sped up the process as well. I would love to talk about the mark that you want to leave on the world. So this podcast is called Stamp Your Mark. It's about leaving a positive impact. Yeah. What would that be for you?
I think I'm kind of less motivated by glory or notoriety. I think some people, they want to be known as the very successful exited founder. For me, success is freedom and not having to worry about money or working. I want to have an old dogs home where I can rescue old dogs that don't get adopted and manage and run a pub. That's kind of in Cornwall. That's kind of all I want. Like,
what a great vision. You have like a painting of this pub in Cornwall.
Yeah, by the sea, and then the profits of the pub fund the old dogs home. That's what I want. But from a impact perspective, I can't think of anything better than bringing genuine transparency to the global hiring market. Mm-hmm. I just think of how many people I've met with horrendous stories, like worse than mine, of being on maternity leave and then asking to come back to work and work 3 days a week in the office and 2 at home, and they're just sacked on maternity leave.
Wow.
That kind of stuff happening all the time. And the problem is that employers aren't held accountable, and I want to use transparency as a way to benefit people and to be able to enhance global mobility. But also, I don't want bad employers to be able to hire as easily. And I want to get to the point where like Flexa is that standard of good employment. And if you're not on Flexa, you're not a good place to work. Mm-hmm. And for that to be the case, rather than these like great places to work stamps that like don't mean anything, yeah. Like they're all for the employer and the glory. That's the dream. And I think that's the positive impact that I'd love to have. And then I'm going to delete all social media and just go and live in Cornwall.
Nice. Love it. Well, it sounds like a brilliant vision. That would be very wholesome.
Yeah.
Very wholesome lifestyle. But that's brilliant. Okay, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.